And I can see it now.
Okay, great.
Fantastic, Sarah. Just sent out a link that workshops are joining now. I'm going to give all the participants a few more moments to make their way into our workshop, and we'll begin in just a moment or two. And just in case people weren't monitoring the chat, I just wanted to let you know that this workshop is being recorded.
With large tech companies. That's what I'm checking right now.
Oh, you're checking right now. Okay. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, OHSU Invent-a-thon hackers. It's my pleasure to introduce the host of today's workshop entitled Partnering with Large Tech Companies. We have with us today two fabulous experts from Hillrom, which is a leading global medical technology company with approximately 10,000 employees worldwide. Our first host is Kirsten Emmons. She is the Director of Clinical Innovation. Her primary role on the global innovation team is to ensure clinical insight, keeping the patient and caregiver at the center of projects throughout the organization. She manages external relationships with hospitals and universities for living lab studies and research utilized to understand clinical, commercial, and technical feasibility of a concept. Kirsten's clinical background includes inpatient oncology care, outpatient infusion, and home hospice. Her most recent experience was Director of Nursing in women's and children's inpatient areas and has learned a deep understanding of the marketing and technology portions of projects lends to ongoing success across entire organizations. She received her BS in nursing from Elmhurst College, her master's in nursing administration from the University of Southern Indiana, and holds a board certification as an advanced nurse executive. Our second host today is Dave Ribble, who has served as the Director of Innovation for Hillrom for the past 9 years. And Dave is responsible for identifying, investigating, and executing growth opportunities at the intersection of clinical needs and emerging technologies. He received his BS from University of Washington in political science and a law degree from Willamette University. And it is now my pleasure to hand the presentation over to them. Thank you so much for being here today. And you may both unmute yourselves and start sharing. Fantastic.
Thanks, Liz. Can you see the presentation?
I can.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. when we were asked to pull some materials together, we thought it might be useful to look at innovation and evaluating opportunities from the perspective of a large company like ours for two reasons. One, evaluating opportunities is something we do every day. And so we'll, kind of give you the perspective we have, maybe as you prepare your presentations for the judges, for the panel that you'll be presenting ideas to. What are the kinds of things people evaluate an opportunity to look for? But on the flip side, we're also developing our own concepts and building the case for new innovations. And so we'll also be able to, come from the perspective of how do you pick and choose between good ideas to be a great idea and a great idea for a number of stakeholders. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Hopefully, we'll only take up about half the time going through the set of slides we have. We'd love to answer any questions you have, and I think Liz will be fielding those for us. As she said, Kirsten and I are from Hillrom, a multinational kind of traditional medical device company, very focused on outcomes. That's probably the one thing that you would think about as you met our company and got to know our culture, that we're very focused on improving outcomes for both patients and for caregivers. And the key way we do that is by advancing connected care, kind of at the intersection of devices, digital technology, and users. Just from a company perspective, if you were to meet us, you would say that we're kind of traditional hospital equipment and devices. Think hospital room beds, operating room tables, OR light systems, nurse call systems, the monitoring that you would find in a med-surg environment, as well as devices that you find in primary care. Our recent focus has really been on the digital intersect of all three of these, of surgical, frontline care, and patient support. So taking technologies and putting them in the hands of caregivers, or connecting EMRs and devices to make those transactions seamless. So as Liz said, Kirsten and I both come from the early innovation team at Hillrom. So there are approximately 10,000 people whose day jobs are developing the products, supporting the products, selling, manufacturing the products that you see in that core of the business, the products that we just talked about. And then there's a handful of us. So Kirsten, Eric Agdepa, a couple of others have been Hillrom's early innovation team for the last several years. And our job is to look outside of those core businesses, the technologies we know well, the products, the users that we know well, and identify what's next, what's new, where's Hillrom going to grow. And so as you can imagine, that puts us in the situation that you're all in kind of on a daily basis. We're looking at, a product that we don't have, a technology we don't have, needing to learn really quickly about needs in an entirely new care area, learning about new technologies that we don't have any experience with. And so that's why hopefully this gives you some of our perspective, and it's relevant to the challenge that you're all going through this weekend. The last thing I'll say is that our team does work in this intersection of clinical, technical, and commercial. And you'll kind of see it in our backgrounds. It's interesting that we're part of the early innovation team for Hillrom in the R&D organization, but I'm not an engineer. I come from a marketing, market research, corporate consulting, mergers and acquisitions background. Kirsten comes from a clinical background, both nursing leader, as well as her background in actually being a caregiver. And so, again, I think that this is what a lot of your teams are doing. You're looking at how can we bring different perspectives to solve the same problem, to get on the same page, to connect those dots. And so hopefully this is a perspective that's useful as you start talking and continue working through these 2 days. Before I jump to this opportunity evaluation process that we go through, just wanted to highlight the fact that we do interact with companies, and so the topic for the presentation is working with big technology companies. One of the ways is partnering for innovation, that we acquire companies and technologies that are innovative, but fully the second part of how we work with other companies, with hospitals, with academia, is to learn from them. And so Kirsten, I'll turn it over to you for a little bit, because that's one of your key roles, is to make those connections with customers, with academia. So if you want to just talk about how we work there.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So last night in some of the keynote sessions, I heard keywords like immersion and falling in love with the problems and understanding what the needs are from your customers or those folks that you identify that need a product or a solution to meet a certain need. And so one of the ways we do that is that we actually partner, like Dave mentioned, with medical centers or with academic medical centers, universities, to look for opportunities to immerse ourselves in our customers' needs and problems and help identify some of those both self-identified issues as well as those that they can't see because they're just in the routine of their daily work and their daily care of their patients. And so we spend time just watching them and listening and learning and taking notes and coming back and evaluating those opportunities. And so the other thing that we do is the next level of that involvement with external folks is that if we have a technology and or we're evaluating a technology that another company has, we might do pilot studies or feasibility studies. So we go into those same academic medical centers or medical centers systems and actually test the devices and put it in the real world environment and do some feasibility testing for whether it clinically still makes sense, what the clinicians say, what the feedback is. Would people buy this? Would they spend their money on it whenever there is such a challenge in determining how they're going to split up those dollars across the health system? And then, of course, does it technically work? So when it was in the real world, when it was in the environment that it's intended for and it's tested, did it break? Or did it still work? Or are there things we need to fix in the device or the prototype?
Yeah, great. And yeah, that's where we spend a lot of our time. And it's really where the best innovations we think come from, is taking great ideas and then getting it in the real world and see what sinks and swims. So now we're just going to take you through kind of 4 perspectives. These are all part of how we evaluate opportunities. And we think, in general, this is how customers think about, whether an idea is a good idea, how investors think about whether they should invest in an idea, and how teams think about, is this where we should dedicate our resources as we try and improve outcomes. So the first perspective that we look at opportunities from is a holistic perspective. And I think that this is an important place to start because for a lot of teams, you're part of a team because you have a technical expertise or a clinical expertise. You're on the team kind of wearing a hat, and you were invited to the team, you were hired because you're an expert in a certain field. And that's very useful kind of for the 10,000 people that we were talking about at Hillrom, who are responsible for, developing our current product, enhancing those, refining them, dealing with problems. But for a small team like ours, it's kind of like a startup, or like the teams that you're creating for this weekend. You're responsible for looking at everything, and you're either need to bring somebody onto your team who represents each different dimension of a innovation that could be relevant, or more likely, you're going to have to be a generalist. You're going to have to wear a lot of hats. You're going to have to learn a lot of fields and then connect those dots. And so, this is just one example of, how these roles are different, within a corporation, in some different contexts. So on the left, if you're a functional perspective. If you're coming into a project because of your expertise in an R&D discipline, you're a coder and you can understand what's going to break, what makes something unique, what makes something robust. And you're on an M&A project, you're really focused just on the code. You're focused on how that code was developed. And so you're looking at it from that perspective. What we're suggesting here is that if you're part of a startup, you're part of one of these teams, you need to look broader than that. You need to look at it from a holistic perspective and think of what are all the things that could go wrong here, or what are all the things that need to be right for this innovation to succeed. So I won't spend a lot of time here. Just the big takeaway here is to don't put blinders on yourself. Think broadly, be curious. Don't think this isn't my job, because when you're in a startup, when you're on one of these teams, everything is your job, because at the end of the day, you succeed or fail based on whether the innovation succeeds or fails. And it can succeed or fail for a host of reasons. And so all of those need to be on your plate. And as I said, I think part of that is really just thinking about the three different areas in which innovation lives and needs to succeed, and make sure that you're thinking about all three of those areas. If you find yourself just so focused on the technology and what's the right technology to solve this problem, make sure you're spending at least as much time thinking about clinically, what's this going to do to patients, kind of the physiology of the clinical aspect, or workflow. How is this going to fit in a clinical care setting? And what needs to change about the care for patients today if they have this innovation, for the better and for the worse. And then finally, just realizing that, money is kind of at the root of most innovations, and you're going to have to connect the dots and understand, how is this going to be reimbursed? Who is this solving a problem for? And can they be my customer? And so I'll just stop there about the holistic perspective, but just as you're working, take the blinders off, think broadly, think about everything that comes to mind as you connect all of your prior experiences. All of those matter. So going on to the second area. So this is what I would say, looking at things from an investor perspective, or depending on the company you're talking to, whoever your audience is, think about what problem they're trying to solve with this investment, with this innovation, and think about it from their perspective. So you've probably heard about this in product development or marketing or some other areas. They talk about the job to be done. What job is a customer hiring this product to do? It's the old analogy. Nobody's looking for a half-inch drill bit. What they want is a half-inch hole. And they're hiring the drill to do that job of giving them a half-inch hole. So what job is your innovation doing? What job is your stakeholder looking to achieve with this innovation? And so, we just look at it from our team's perspective of early innovation. We have a number of filters. We're trying to do a job for our organization. And so we're looking at innovations that are close enough to our core to make sense for us to invest in, but far enough that they're outside the core, that they're something that we would focus on, something that's going to be financially significant, that's going to improve outcomes. This is just another way of saying that every great idea isn't a great idea for every stakeholder, for every audience, for every customer. And so looking at it from a startup perspective, as you're looking at investors or at industry partners, which is what we're talking about, think about, what job is this industry partner trying to do? Are they trying to get into a new field? Are they trying to bolster a current product? And so having that empathy, surprisingly, that's the word, but that empathy for a corporation, understanding that corporations need as a customer, and thinking about, how does this innovation, how does this opportunity align with their needs? I think that's a helpful perspective in whatever conversation you're having. When we're pitching something internally, we're talking to the CFO. What are they looking for from an innovation? What scares them about innovation? And just having that empathy, that understanding that people are investing to solve a need, to address a problem. And you need to understand what that problem is before you can start to, explain how your innovation solves that need. This is just another way of looking at kind of the same question. You can look at innovation and your audience in terms of how close it is to their core. And it's not good or bad. The fact that something is close to the core doesn't make it innovative, doesn't make it not innovative. Again, it's just a question of what job are they trying to do? How close do they want an investment to be to their core? Are they trying to, like I showed before, bolster the castle? Are they trying to add a product line to their sales channel? Or are they trying to enter a totally new field? So again, the takeaway here, in your presentations tomorrow, or as you're looking to find investors for a startup that comes out of this process, think about the customer, your customer, which in this case is your investor, your decision maker.
Hey, Dave.
Yep.
Do you want to tell them where they can find a couple of pieces of that information? So where would you send them in the next few hours, 12, 18 hours, to look at companies or potential investors?
Yeah, that's a great perspective. And you may have already seen this as you start to look at the area of opportunity, the need, and the problem, and your solution. I think we'll normally start with a competitive landscape. We'll look at what are the other companies trying to solve this problem. And what we're trying to do, we're almost always asking, how is this different? How is this differentiated? How is this unique? And so compare yourself to these other ways to solve the problem, and then think about, who does this make the most sense for? That's really one of the big questions that a company is going to ask when it's looking at an innovation, or internally when we're deciding whether to fund something or not. Why does this make more sense for us to own than anybody else? Why are we uniquely situated to build this, sell this, do this? And so thinking about that need and what's unique about your solution and about your team is probably a good place to start.
Thank you.
So this one, there's quite a bit of detail here because this is an area that's been well researched, but I think it's a really good starting point. And I think it's understandable enough on this slide that it's useful for this process. But looking at this Harvard Business Review article later and some of the research that's tied to this article is going to be really helpful going forward. So what we're going to talk about here is the real win-worth methodology. And this is really just a way of standing back from an innovation, a concept, at any point in its development process and asking just a couple of questions. And they're really basic questions. I think any of you would say, if I had time, if I was thinking about it, these are the questions that I'd ask about this innovation, about this opportunity, to say, is this a good idea or not? But again, this kind of forces you to think holistically, to go through all of the ways a project can fail, or all the things that need to be true for something to succeed. It's based on research going out and looking at actual R&D projects and saying, did the project succeed or fail? And if it failed, what was at the root of the failure? And so they did this analysis, and they said it's really these 6 questions. And so the questions are, is it real? Meaning, is the market real? Is the problem real? Is there a real need? And then, is the product real? Can this product work? Can this product be manufactured? Can this be done? Both of those need to be true. And they're kind of, flips of the same coin. A lot of times, and this is a challenge for us, a lot of times there's a great technology. everybody's talking about it. It's something newly developed, or our company had a breakthrough. And so, yeah, this product is real. It does this. What some companies forget is to say, okay, I can see what it would do in the market, but is it really solving a problem? It's the challenge of technology push versus need pull. And Kirsten and I, as we've worked together, and we think a lot of teams think the same way, you need to start with a need. Or if you're not starting with a need, you need to circle back quickly and just confirm that, we're not fooling ourselves. We're not talking ourselves into anything. We're not trying to, sell this hammer and looking at everything as though it's a nail. And so this is the first place to start. And as you think through your project, this is, in time, probably the first place to start. Is the market real? And then is the product real? And we'll get into a little more detail on this in a sec. Second, can we win? And so the first part of that is the product, the opportunity, the innovation. Can that product win? Is that product going to win versus other solutions to the problem, or not solving the problem at all? Can the product be competitive? And then the second part is, looking at it from the company perspective. Can our company be competitive? Is this the kind of product that we can sell, that we can take to market, that we can support? And then the third is it worth doing? First, the financial part. Is it worth doing financially? Is it a big enough opportunity to try and achieve? Or even if we were successful, it's not significant enough to justify all this work. Is it going to be profitable? And is it going to be profitable enough for our company or for this investor? And so is it worth doing financially? And then is it worth doing strategically? Is this an area we want to be in? And this kind of goes back to that earlier discussion about the investor perspective. What are we trying to do with this concept, this new product? And is it something we want to do? Is it too risky? Is it an area that we don't want to be in? Is it an area that we think is going to be, the technology of the future, and we desperately want to be in that area? So real win worth. 3 questions, 2 sub-questions for each. It's a really simple methodology, but it's been really useful just to center conversations, to lead the team through not just the interesting parts of a new technology or the perspective that we have from clinical experience, but holistically, systematically looking at a concept and saying, is it real? Can we win? Is it worth doing? Can really give you a structure to have that conversation. As I said, and Liz, I think the materials are going to be circulated, or they're available to download. If they're not, we can probably figure out a way to do that. But I won't go through all of this text, but this is just giving you a little more detail on each of those areas. When we say, is the market real? We're saying, is there a need or a desire for the product? Can the customer buy it? Is the size of the market adequate? And will the customer buy it, given all the compromises you have to make as you develop a product? And so there's kind of the same detail in each of those questions. And this is, learning from a lot of research that's been done and a lot of companies that have used the real win-worth methodology. But it's a really useful tool to take your innovation through, or say you're debating 2 or 3 different concepts that your team might work on. Asking these questions can often find a critical problem in one of the concepts that, if we'd known 6 months ago what we know now, we never would have done this project, because we know that it's not reimbursed, or there's not actually a customer need that can be solved with this solution, but that can be solved with another solution. It's a chance to pivot. So again, this, we think, is a really useful methodology to think critically about innovation. And then the last perspective is a pragmatic perspective, or striking the right balance, or wearing both the hats of the optimist and the pessimist. Because you're actually going to have both on your team or in a startup. So one way of looking at that is, this is from the company Gartner Research, and this is what they call the hype cycle. So this is a report they publish in a lot of fields every year, and they're talking about great ideas, new technologies, new innovations, but also recognizing that sometimes they get overhyped. This is one of the areas that people talk about a lot. Inflated expectations around technologies. And that, I think, is useful for our team. It's useful for your teams. As you look at a technology, recognize that the fact that a lot of people are talking about it doesn't mean it makes sense. The fact that you're seeing it in the news a lot doesn't necessarily make it real. I mean, we can talk dismissively about some technologies and some companies as smoke and mirrors, but there is some smoke and mirrors. Some people are, kind of faking it until they make it, or describing a best case scenario, when we all know that eventually we're going to go through this trough of disillusionment. It doesn't work as well as we thought, as we hoped, as we'd been told. And so the reason I wanted to put this slide up there is just to remember that most technologies, most opportunities aren't as great as you think they are, or as bad as you think they are. And if you can kind of impose that discipline, that critical thinking on yourself, and walk into your pitch meeting or walk into a presentation knowing what the limitations of your technology are, knowing where people have too high of expectations around a technology, and confront that by yourself, and redirecting the conversation to why it's still a good decision, even if it's not a silver bullet, that can be helpful in maintaining your credibility and directing your team to focus on the right things. A second area, and this is from, again, a really great bit of research. This was written up in a journal article. There's a bibliography after this. But this is talking about the diffusion of technology. How widely adopted are even the best ideas? And this is saying that even the best ideas, there are some things about a great idea that make it more likely to be adopted quickly or less likely to be adopted quickly. And so this comes into play when we're talking about, for example, financial modeling or modeling a business opportunity. And you've all probably seen, if you've been around innovation and startups, you've seen revenue projections. And they're almost all hockey sticks. I mean, there's a belief that everything's going to take off quickly. And this is really looking at some research that asks what makes an idea take off quickly, or what makes an idea slow to be adopted. And so again, think about these 5 dimensions. Is there a real relative advantage to the innovation that you're talking about? Can you clearly articulate and test and prove that this is superior to the way we're doing things right now? Secondly, compatibility. The complexity of the solution. Do I need to integrate with this with 5 other devices, with 7 other teams in order to make this work, to make this succeed? Trialability. Can I actually test this device? Is it like an iPhone and I can pick it up and it works? Or I can only see the benefit of this clinical intervention once we've studied 10,000 patients for 3 years, and only at the end of that will I know if this worked or not. And then finally, I kind of combine trialability and observability. Can I try it? And then can I observe the outcome? Can I observe the benefit? So again, these 5 categories are just useful categories to think about, or possibly in a presentation to say why your innovation is superior, why this is worth funding, because this is something that a customer is going to be able to clearly see the advantage. The advantage can be proven. It can be implemented on a trial basis to see that benefit. These are the kinds of factors that make one innovation easier to fund than another, and easier for a customer to adopt than another. And then finally, and this is a slide we talk about a lot, in our team. Our team needs the diversity that we talked about above, clinical, commercial, technical, but it also needs optimists and pessimists. And so that's kind of why I'm here and kind of why Kirsten's here. Kirsten sees the opportunity, I see the problems. I think I'm always going to see the world as a lawyer, and Kirsten's always going to see the world as a caregiver who's making things better. And again, you probably need both perspectives on your team or within your own mind. You need to sometimes, use a methodology like red hat, black hat, green hat to say, okay, we're intentionally going to look at the opportunities here. We're just going to spend 30 minutes brainstorming what's good about this idea. Or we're going to spend 30 minutes just shooting holes in this. And you really can't do both at the same time. This is saying that we can be critical, but if we intermix being critical with being creative and optimistic at the same time, you mute that creative discussion. And I'll turn this over to you, Kirsten, to talk a little bit more about that. But again, as your teams are coming together, and as I understand it, probably teams that haven't worked together, think about the role you're playing on the team, both, what background are you bringing in, technical, clinical, commercial, but also what perspective are you bringing? Are you the optimist on the team? Are you the pessimist? And either make sure that you've got both perspectives and you respect both perspectives, or figure out a way to make yourself wear those different hats. So Kirsten, if you want to talk about how teams work and our teams work like that.
Yeah, you covered it fantastic. Honestly, I would just add that I think it is important just to call out those timeframes. So at the very beginning, stay optimistic, stay adventurous, stay nun-like I am in all of our projects per your chart there. But I think that it's just really important to give that that time and that effort into, Dave mentioned the red, green, and black hat. Let's talk about the fact that right now we're going to all be positive, and we're going to do that for a certain time frame, and call out when somebody's kind of shooting holes in the positivity. And then on the other hand, go the other direction and have those definite, defined times where you're going to say, we have to be the ones that shoot the hole in this before you're in your presentation and someone else is shooting that hole. Because I guarantee that there's somebody sitting there and thinking something negative on your team that the judges are going to think too. So have those conversations up front so you can hit them head on.
So that's kind of all we brought to talk about. We just wanted to share, some of the different perspectives that we think we have to go through as we develop our pitches, or we develop our innovations, or when we're on the other side of the table as we're looking at opportunities and we're deciding which group to fund, which opportunity to invest in. It's kind of the same process. So hopefully this is useful to you as you're developing your idea, that you're finding the best idea. And best can mean a lot of different things. Depends on your audience. It depends on your team. And think about, as you prepare a presentation, what's going to be in your judge's mind? What's going to be in a panelist's mind? And anticipating that these are the kinds of things that decision makers, investors think about as they evaluate opportunities. So Liz, I don't know if any questions have come in, but let's open it up.
Fantastic. I just first want to say thank you to you both for such an amazing presentation. And I wanted to answer your previous question about the recording. So this will be first sent to YouTube, and that link to YouTube will then be added to the participant handbook. So all of the participants are going to be able to access that. Additionally, if everyone would like to write their questions in the chat, I will then be reading any questions that they have to our hosts. But first, while people are writing, I just wanted to start out with a question. So one of the things, first, I just wanted to say I love the tool that you gave them with the red hat, green hat, black hat. And it kind of leads into my question of, do you guys have any other tools? So one of the things that these participants are going to have to do with wearing their multiple hats is triaging their time in order to come up with these solutions. So do you guys have any good suggestions for the participants of how to triage their time when coming up with their solutions, working together as a team?
I'll throw out one tool that might work even in this shortened period. We work in what we call spirals, and a lot of front end of innovation or early innovation teams think about spirals, meaning we start a project and we don't have a project plan to solve everything. We look at the project and say, what are our key hypotheses? What are the things that if it's true, we're going to win? If it's false, we're going to fail. And call out those hypotheses and say, this is the most important one. We're going to spend 30 minutes trying to figure out if this is true or not, if this is possible or not. And then kind of whittle it down. It gives you an opportunity to pivot quickly. We thought that this was how the market works, but that's actually not how physicians get paid. Or it's the way physicians were paid 20 years ago, but it's not now. Those opportunities to look at a key hypothesis, test it, and then continue or pivot might be helpful in managing your time and your activities here.
Great. That is really helpful.
Liz, I'll ask, so Dave and Eric, I know, is on the phone as well. And from Hillrom, when you guys think about our hackathons or when we've gone for a few day period, do you start kind of at the end and back up? How did you manage your time in those events?
Yeah, for my teams, when we've done hackathons, beginning with the end in mind is critical. I mean, knowing that we want to have a physical prototype, we want to have a working model by this time, and then we do map it out in chunks behind, and we'll often break it up into different groups, saying that this is going to be the UX team, this is going to be the market research and analysis team. And so you can do some multitasking, but having kind of concrete milestones and objectives and working to those, I think is helpful in these short sprints.
Great. Thank you for that. So we do have some questions in the chat now. So I'm going to start first. What are the best ways not to get founded? What are some big errors that we can try to just go ahead and skip?
I'll take one, but Kirsten, do you have anything that comes to mind? I'd say the one that comes to my mind is credibility. The one fatal thing that we see in a presentation is something that makes us question your credibility, question the background, because we're not experts in the field you're talking about. And so a lot of this, until we're deep in the due diligence phase, we're taking on faith. We're assuming that you've researched. And if we see things or we do some quick research and we find that that's not true, you don't understand the space as well as you think you do. You don't understand the competitors. You don't understand the current solutions. Those are the kinds of things, if you overpromise in your pitch, those are the kinds of things that make me feel I can't trust you on the things I know. I definitely can't trust you on the things I don't know. And so for me, that's probably number one.
Mhm.
So I think from a credibility point of view, and what Dave's pointing out is that when we're listening to pitch sessions, how do we perceive you as credible, right? I think one, you have to believe in what you're talking about. So you need to be passionate. You need to identify that need. And I heard that over and over in the sessions last evening from the keynotes is know what the need is, know what problem is that you're trying to solve and understand it thoroughly, or as thoroughly as you can in this time frame. And that may mean splitting up some of your team where one takes over figuring out this hypothesis, the other group, the other portion of you looks at the technology portion of this and understanding it. And answering those questions up front, and never underestimate the fact, especially virtually, you all, we can Google as you're presenting. So anyone or any judge can sit and be looking up things as you're talking. So just again, kind of play that devil's advocate role and look those things up prior and see what else is out there.
Great points. Okay, so here we have from Jonathan. How many collaborators are too many, and when does a problem and its associated users, stakeholders become too complex to pursue?
Dave, as you think about the numbers, I think the one thing I would add about the complexity is really think about when you identify that problem, identify the workflow that they address that problem with today. So if they're trying to diagnose a certain disease in a primary care office, think about how they go about that and what's that routine now. And think about if we have a new diagnostic tool, what does that mean for that current workflow? How does it impact it? Then I think about what you would have to do to prove to them that this way is better. So if you can't come up with a huge win for them financially, that they could maybe make X amount of dollars more, generate X amount of revenue per year, and diagnose earlier Y amount of patients, if that's not obvious, you then need to think about what type of clinical studies would I need to prove this, and what would that cost? So if you want to diagnose something and you need to do a $5 million clinical trial to prove it, you have to consider that going into it as far as the cost of your prototype and or your diagnostic test, for instance. And the number of people, Ribble,
Well, the number of people, the number of collaborators, it kind of comes to a key question that Kirsten and I go around, on often. It's if we focus, if we're narrow, we have a better chance of coming up with a solution with managing this quickly, but it may not be big enough. It might be not be impactful enough. Or, if we try and boil the ocean, if we try and be everything, if we solve this major issue, it can be really challenging, but it might change our company. And so think about it in terms of cost benefit, or just look at your XY analysis and say, recognize when your solution, your project, your innovation is becoming really complicated, kind of unwieldy, a lot of partners, a lot of moving parts, and say, is this worth it? I mean, is the light worth the candle? Is it going to be, justified in the end? Even then, I'd suggest think about it in phases, or those spirals is useful. Say, I can prove that this is true. And if I can prove this is true, we have credibility. We've learned something significant. And so breaking things up into pieces that we can test, we can develop, we can prove and move on, or kill the project is another good way of balancing the number of collaborators and the complexity of the problem.
Great, thank you. Let's see, so the next question I have here is, how do you evaluate your competitiveness as a company when you're still new to the business? So maybe just talk a little bit about, I guess if you're exploring a new space, how do you guys figure out your own competitiveness when moving into new innovations?
It's definitely a consideration, because like a lot of companies that follow kind of a GE model, we're looking for opportunities to be leaders, to be number one or number two in any segment where we play. And there are a lot of fields that it just feels prohibitive to go against an entrenched competitor. That being said, all the research around disruption suggests that often those entrenched competitors are the ones who are most likely to be disrupted by a novel technology, especially that's solving a problem in a new way, possibly a suboptimal way, a way that's not as complete as the current solution, but has big advantages in terms of cost or ease of use, et cetera. And so, again, it's a balance. If you're telling us that to adopt this technology, to buy this company, I have to go against Philips and GE, I'm going to have to see a real path forward. I'm going to have to see that this technology isn't going to be head to head with them, that we're going to find a path to disrupt them. But confronting that up front is important, just to recognize that we have to beat this company to win. And it puts a big hurdle there, but it's the hurdle you're going to have to cross. And so, coming up with a solution that has a chance to win against that is probably the first step.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's see. The next question we have here, how do we expose our ideas and solutions to potential investors? Is there a way to do this before the formal pitch? Actually, I can answer that. We have our practice pitches this evening. If you go to the schedule, you will see the link for that. And you can also look in the participant handbook about the practice pitch sessions. And then moving on to the last question that we have in the chat. How do you set the limit when thinking holistically? How do you make sure that you're not going too broad? How do you rein yourself in? Which probably will be
I'll let Kirsten take that one. Let me just add one thing to your practice pitch sessions. Kind of beyond the context of this meeting, a lot of areas of the country or a lot of different medical device areas have done a good job of doing what you guys are doing here, which is having mentors. And so finding a mentorship problem either as part of a incubator accelerator or other ways to connect startups, inventors, entrepreneurs with mentors, with people with experience, that can be really valuable. Just getting that real world experience of, okay, after our pitch, when the door closes, who's talking and how do they talk? And just giving people some of that experience that they're not going to have, at their first startup pitch can be really useful. So hopefully you're taking advantage of those mentors that are supporting this weekend. That can be a really useful head start.
It also seems like there's plenty of contacts on that list for your expert panels, for as well as the mentors to reach out to, and you have their contact information. Okay, yeah, so I always want to boil the ocean. But I think when you talk about thinking too broadly, or is there a limit to your holistic thinking, I don't believe there is. What I believe, though, is that you're on a time frame in this current environment where you need to be cognizant of that time frame. So I would start big. I would set a time again as you kind of march out what you're going to do over the next few hours. I would really determine there's a time where we say, you know what, this could fix everything everywhere. And by golly, I want everybody to listen to everything that I think it could fix. But be mindful that when you do this pitch session, you're going to go against your competitors within this experiment or this opportunity that are going to be able to clearly identify a market. So try to hone in after a certain time frame. This, though, is the largest opportunity, and this is where we can have the most impact and make the most money, to be honest with you, because this is the area that we think we can impact the greatest. And you can note, here's all of the other things that we can identify. So we might have an opportunity to say, we could work within this market for this particular device, but we see a future where it could help with XYZ.
Yeah. Calling out next steps or a roadmap is a really useful way to make your presentation concrete enough to evaluate, but then show the opportunity beyond what you're researching. The other thing I'd throw in there about, how do you set a limit when you're thinking holistically? I'd argue that the question isn't, how wide should your view be, but how deep can it be? So holistically, in terms of wide, anything that could kill your project is fair game. You should be thinking about anything that's possibly going to be in a judge's mind when they're evaluating the opportunity, or in a company's mind as they're evaluating an investment. But I think it is legitimate to say our analysis is only this deep. And we're going to have to say, I'm only going to spend an hour and a half researching this question. Back to the credibility. That doesn't mean that you can make it up. That doesn't mean that you can make, kind of key assumptions without any foundation. But it does mean that, based on market research, feedback from 6 clinicians, we believe that this is the care practice and this is how our device could be adopted. Our next step would be more formal market research to validate this in both the United States and France, for example. So holistically, I think you still have to be broad, but you can decide how deep you go on any of those as long as you're answering the key questions and maintaining your credibility.
Fantastic. Well, Kirsten and Dave, I learned so much during your workshop. It was fantastic. I thank you so much. And I just want to remind all of the participants to head into the chat. There is a link that I just posted that is the workshop questionnaire. There's only just a couple questions. It'll only take you a short minute. If you wouldn't mind filling that out for us, we would really appreciate it. And we look forward to interacting with you for the rest of the event. Take care.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Good luck. Have fun.